My parents boycotted my wedding, called my fiancé a nobody, and told our entire family I was throwing my life away. But when they found out who I actually married, they showed up at my doorstep begging for forgiveness and a very large favor. Picture this. It's 3 days after the most beautiful wedding of my life. I'm still glowing from marrying the love of my life, still finding confetti in my hair, still smiling every time I look at my wedding ring. Then my doorbell rings, and I open the door to find my parents standing there with tears in their eyes and desperation written all over their faces. The same parents who had spent 6 months trying to sabotage my relationship. The same parents who told me I was embarrassing the family by marrying beneath my station. The same parents who refused to walk me down the aisle because they thought my husband was just some construction worker who wasn't good enough for their precious daughter. "Emma, sweetheart," my mother said, her voice shaking, "we made a terrible mistake. We had no idea who Alex really was. Can we please come in? We need to talk." What they had discovered about my husband's true identity would shock you. But what they asked me for next would test everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and the difference between loving someone and needing something from them. This is the story of how my parents went from rejecting my soulmate to begging for access to him, and how I learned that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting people show you who they really are. To understand how my wedding day became a battlefield, I need to take you back to the day I brought home the love of my life, and my parents decided he wasn't good enough for me before they even learned his last name. My name is Emma, and I'm 26 years old. I work in marketing for a mid-sized company, and up until 2 years ago, I was what you might call a chronic people pleaser. Especially when it came to my parents, Richard and Margaret, who had very specific ideas about what my life should look like. My parents are what I generously call social climbers. They live in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, drive nice cars, and spend an enormous amount of energy making sure everyone knows exactly how successful and sophisticated they are. Status isn't just important to them, it's everything. They measure their worth by their zip code, their friends by their bank accounts, and their children by how well we reflect their carefully constructed image. Growing up, I was constantly reminded that I needed to date appropriate boys from good families. Boys whose fathers had respectable careers, whose mothers belonged to the right social clubs, whose last names meant something in our community. I dated a string of guys who looked perfect on paper, but treated me like an accessory to their own ambitions. Then, 18 months ago, everything changed when I met Alex. I was having the worst day of my life, missed my morning meeting because of a delayed train, spilled coffee all over my presentation materials, and my phone died right before an important client call. I ducked into this little coffee shop near my office to regroup, and I was sitting there fighting back tears of frustration when this guy at the next table looked over and said, "Rough morning." That was Alex. 28 years old, wearing work boots and jeans with paint stains, drinking black coffee, and reading an actual newspaper, like some kind of time traveler. He had kind eyes, gentle hands, and when he smiled, I felt something I'd never felt with any of those appropriate boys my parents had pushed me toward. We started talking, and I discovered that Alex was funny, intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. Not because of who my parents were or what I could do for his career, but because he actually liked me. When was the last time someone had made me feel that way? Never, if I'm being honest. Alex worked construction, drove a 15-year-old pickup truck, and lived in a small apartment on the other side of town. He shopped at thrift stores, cooked dinner instead of going to expensive restaurants, and spent his free time reading books and volunteering at a local literacy program. To me, he was perfect. To my parents, he was a disaster. The first time I brought Alex home for dinner, I knew within 5 minutes that my parents had already written him off. My father barely looked up from his phone during introductions. My mother's smile was so fake it could have been legally classified as false advertising. They asked pointed questions about his career aspirations and his family background, with a kind of polite condescension that made my skin crawl. Alex handled it with more grace than they deserved, answering their questions honestly and trying to find common ground. But I could see them getting more disapproving with every word he spoke. When he mentioned that he was taking night classes to learn carpentry techniques from different cultures, my father actually rolled his eyes. After Alex left that night, my parents sat me down for what they called a concerned conversation, but felt more like an intervention. Emma, sweetie, my mother said, we know you think you care about this boy, but you have to think about your future. What kind of life can he really provide for you? My father was more direct. He seems nice enough, but he's not our kind of people. You're educated, you have opportunities, you come from a good family. Don't throw that away on someone who's going to hold you back. I should have defended Alex right then and there. I should have told them that he made me happier than I'd ever been, that he treated me with more respect and kindness than anyone I'd ever dated, that their definition of success was shallow and meaningless. Instead, I said I'd think about what they said. Because that's what good daughters do, right? They consider their parents' wisdom, even when that wisdom feels like poison. But here's the thing about love. The real kind, not the fake kind I'd been settling for, it doesn't go away just because other people disapprove of it. If anything, my parents' rejection made me see Alex more clearly. While they were worried about his job and his address, I was falling in love with his character. Over the next 6 months, I watched Alex handle my parents' coldness with patience and dignity. I saw him work extra shifts to take me somewhere special for my birthday, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because making me happy made him happy. I learned that he sent money to his elderly neighbor to help with her groceries, that he taught himself 3 languages just because he was curious about the world, that he had opinions about art and music and politics that were thoughtful and informed. Most importantly, I realized that Alex never, not once, tried to change me or mold me into someone else's idea of the perfect girlfriend. He loved me exactly as I was, flaws and all. So, when he proposed to me on a quiet Sunday morning in his tiny apartment, with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, I said yes, without hesitation. That's when the real war began. I thought their disapproval would fade once they got to know Alex, but what happened when I announced our engagement showed me exactly who my parents really were, and it wasn't pretty. I decided to share the news at our regular family Sunday dinner, thinking that the familiar setting might make the conversation easier. Alex and I had talked about it, and we agreed that I should tell them privately first, then bring Alex over later in the week, so we could all celebrate together. I was so naive. Mom, Dad, Michael, I said to my parents and my younger brother, trying to keep my voice steady, I have some exciting news to share. Alex proposed, and I said yes. We're getting married. The silence that followed was deafening. My brother Michael smiled and started to say congratulations, but my father's expression stopped him mid-word. You're joking, my mother said flatly. I'm not joking. I'm engaged. I'm happy. I thought you'd be happy for me. My father set down his fork with deliberate precision and looked at me like I'd just announced I was dropping out of society to join a cult. Emma, this is ridiculous. You can't be serious about marrying that boy. That boy has a name, Dad. His name is Alex, and I love him. Love, my mother scoffed. You think love is enough? You think love pays the bills? You think love gives you security and status and a future? I think love matters more than any of those things. What happened next was the most brutal 20 minutes of my life. My parents didn't just express disappointment. They launched into a full-scale character assassination of the man I wanted to spend my life with. My mother. He's clearly using you, Emma. Can't you see that? He's got nothing, and you're his ticket to a better life. My father. This is embarrassing. What am I supposed to tell people at the country club? That my daughter is marrying some handyman she picked up at a coffee shop. My mother. Think about your children, Emma. Do you want them to grow up with a father who can't provide for them? My father. This is what happens when you let your emotions make important decisions. You're throwing away everything we've worked to give you. I tried to defend Alex, tried to explain that he was kind and intelligent and hardworking. I told them about his volunteer work, his night classes, his dreams of starting his own renovation business someday. I begged them to give him a real chance, to spend time getting to know him instead of judging him by his paycheck. They weren't interested in hearing any of it. Then came the ultimatum that changed everything. Emma, my father said, his voice cold and final. You need to choose. You can have this fantasy relationship with someone who will never be able to give you the life you deserve, or you can be part of this family. But you can't have both. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you marry him, don't expect us to be part of it. We won't attend the wedding, we won't support this mistake, and we won't pretend to be happy about watching you destroy your future. My mother nodded in agreement. We love you too much to enable this poor decision. Sometimes tough love means letting someone learn from their mistakes the hard way. I looked at my brother Michael, hoping for some support, some voice of reason. He looked miserable, but stayed silent. Later, I'd learned that they'd already gotten to him, convinced him that speaking up would just make things worse for everyone. I left that dinner feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to want me to be happy, who were supposed to support me through life's biggest moments. Instead, they were willing to cut me out of their lives entirely because I'd fallen in love with someone they considered beneath us. But the betrayal was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, I discovered that my parents had launched a full-scale campaign to sabotage my relationship and isolate me from our extended family. They called my aunts and uncles, my cousins, even family friends, to share their concerns about my engagement. They painted Alex as a gold digger and me as a naive girl making a catastrophic mistake. They asked people to talk sense into me and help me see reason before I ruined my life permanently. I started getting calls from relatives I barely talked to, all expressing worry about my sudden decision to marry someone they'd never met. Cousins I'd grown up with started asking probing questions about Alex's family background and financial situation. Family friends who had known me since childhood suddenly seemed uncomfortable around me, like I was a cautionary tale they were afraid to get too close to. The worst part was discovering that my parents had told people Alex was pressuring me into marriage, that they were worried he was controlling or manipulative, that they thought I might be in some kind of unhealthy relationship. The irony was staggering. They were worried about someone controlling me while they were actively trying to control every aspect of my life. But they weren't done. When the family guilt trip didn't work, they moved on to financial warfare. I'd been on my parents' family cell phone plan since college. They canceled my line without warning. I'd been covered under their health insurance as a dependent. They dropped me, claiming I was making adult decisions, so I needed to handle adult responsibilities. They'd been helping me with my car insurance. That ended too. When I confronted them about it, my mother's response was, "If you want to act like we don't matter, then we'll treat you like you don't matter either." I realized then that their love had always been conditional. As long as I was the obedient daughter who made choices they approved of, they'd support me. But the moment I chose my own happiness over their expectations, I became expendable. The final straw came when I found out they'd been talking to Alex directly, behind my back, trying to convince him to break up with me for my own good. Alex told me about it that night, and I could see how much their words had hurt him. "They offered me money, Emma," he said quietly. "They said they'd pay me $5,000 to disappear from your life before I dragged you down any further." I felt sick. Not just because they'd insulted the man I loved, but because they'd shown me exactly what they thought of both of us. That night, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to choose between Alex and my family because they'd already made that choice for me. I was going to marry the man I loved, with or without their blessing. And if they wanted to miss out on my happiness, that was their loss, not mine. I had no idea how much they'd come to regret that decision. As our wedding day approached, my parents' sabotage campaign reached levels I never thought possible, but what I discovered about their motivations was even more shocking than their behavior. After the money offer incident, I thought my parents had hit rock bottom in terms of their treatment of Alex and me. I was wrong. If anything, our determination to move forward with the wedding seemed to make them more desperate and more cruel. The first sign that things were escalating came when our wedding venue called me at work, sounding confused and apologetic. "Miss Thompson," the wedding coordinator said, "I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about your event next month. Someone claiming to be your mother called to tell us that the wedding was being postponed indefinitely due to family illness and that we should cancel all the arrangements." My heart sank. That's not true. The wedding is absolutely happening as scheduled. Oh, thank goodness. We were so confused because your deposit is non-refundable, and it seemed strange that no one had called to discuss the cancellation fees. But then we got another call an hour later from someone claiming to be your father, saying there were safety concerns about your fiancé and asking about our security policies. Safety concerns. They were actually trying to paint Alex as dangerous. I immediately called the caterer, the florist, the photographer, and the band. My parents had contacted every single one of them with different stories. They told the caterer that Alex had food allergies they needed to discuss. They told the florist that the color scheme needed to be changed due to cultural sensitivity issues. They told the photographer that there might be family objections during the ceremony that needed to be handled discreetly. It was psychological warfare designed to make our vendors uncomfortable and possibly withdraw their services. But they didn't stop there. I started hearing from friends and extended family members who had been personally contacted by my parents, asking them to reconsider attending the wedding. My cousin Jessica called me in tears. "Emma, I don't know what to do. Your mom called me and said that you're making a huge mistake, that Alex has been lying to you about his background, and that she's worried for your safety. She asked me not to come to the wedding because my presence would be enabling your poor decision." She said what? She said they've done some research into Alex's past and found some concerning information that they can't share for legal reasons, but that they're hoping you'll come to your senses before you do something you'll regret forever. Legal reasons. They were implying that Alex had some kind of criminal background or legal troubles. It was a lie designed to sound just credible enough to make people worry, without being specific enough to be disproven. I called my brother Michael to confront him about what our parents were doing. "Emma, I can't get involved," he said, sounding exhausted. "They're saying things about Alex that look, I don't know what to believe anymore." "What kind of things?" "They hired a private investigator to look into his background." I felt like the world had tilted off its axis. They did what? A private investigator. They said they needed to protect you, that something about Alex's story didn't add up, that he was hiding something important. Michael, that's insane. That's a violation of his privacy. It's controlling. They said the investigator found some information that confirms their suspicions, but they won't tell me what it is. They just keep saying that when the truth comes out, you'll understand why they tried so hard to stop this wedding. After I hung up, I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to process what I'd just learned. My parents had actually hired someone to investigate the man I loved. They were so convinced that their judgment was superior to mine that they'd paid a stranger to dig into Alex's private life, looking for ammunition to use against him. But here's what really bothered me. Michael had said the investigator found information that confirmed their suspicions. What information? What could they possibly have discovered that would justify this level of interference? That night, I told Alex what I'd learned. I expected him to be angry, to be outraged at the invasion of his privacy. Instead, he went very quiet and very still. "Alex, what is it? Is there something you haven't told me?" He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not guilty, exactly, but complicated. "Emma, there are things about my past that I haven't shared with you. Not because I'm ashamed or because I'm hiding anything dangerous, but because those things aren't who I am anymore." "What kind of things?" My family has money. A lot of money. And I walked away from it when I turned 25 because I couldn't stand the person it was turning me into. I stared at him. "What do you mean, a lot of money?" "I mean trust fund, private school, country club, never worked a day in my life, kind of money. I mean the kind of money your parents would absolutely approve of if they knew about it." My mind was reeling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I've spent the last 3 years trying to build a life based on who I actually am, not what my bank account looks like. I wanted you to love me for me, not for what I could buy you, or what social doors I could open for you." "Alex, I would never." "I know you wouldn't. That's why I fell in love with you. But Emma, if your parents found out about my family's money, they would change their tune completely. And I couldn't stand the thought of them suddenly approving of me for all the wrong reasons." As we talked more that night, the full picture started to emerge. Alex came from one of the wealthiest families in our state. His father owned a chain of luxury hotels. His mother sat on the boards of multiple charities and cultural institutions. Alex had grown up with every privilege imaginable, but he'd also watched his family's money corrupt their values and relationships. When he turned 25, he'd gained access to his trust fund and immediately put it in investments he couldn't touch for 10 years. He'd changed his last name legally, moved across the country, and started over with nothing but his savings from a summer job. "I wanted to know what it felt like to earn something," he said. "I wanted to have relationships with people who liked me, not my connections. I wanted to build something with my own hands instead of just inheriting it." "And your construction work?" "I love it. I'm good at it. And when I eventually start my own business, it'll be because I learned every aspect of it from the ground up, not because Daddy gave me startup money." I was amazed by his integrity, his commitment to building an authentic life. But I was also terrified because I realized what this meant. My parents had hired a private investigator who had somehow discovered Alex's real background. They knew he came from money, serious money. They knew that their fears about him being a gold digger were not only wrong but laughably backwards. And they were keeping that information secret, continuing to sabotage our wedding, because admitting they were wrong would require them to acknowledge that their values were completely twisted. They'd rather see me unhappy than admit that they'd judged someone based on appearances instead of character. But I was about to turn their game against them, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. 2 weeks before our wedding, I decided I was done being a victim. If my parents wanted to play detective, I'd show them what a real investigation looked like. The morning after Alex told me about his family background, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My parents had been manipulating, lying, and sabotaging our relationship based on information they were keeping secret. Well, two could play that game. I called in sick to work and spent the day doing something I should have done months ago. I started investigating my parents with the same thoroughness they'd used to investigate Alex. First, I wanted to understand their financial situation. They'd been criticizing Alex for not being able to provide for me, but what was their own financial reality? Using my marketing research skills and some creative online searching, I started piecing together a picture of my parents' finances that shocked me. Their house, which I'd always assumed was paid off, had been refinanced 3 times in the past 5 years. Their cars were leased, not owned. My father's business, which he'd always described as very successful, had been struggling for over 2 years based on public records I could access. But the most interesting discovery was their credit situation. Through some digging into public records and court filings, I found that my parents had been involved in 2 lawsuits in the past 18 months, both related to unpaid debts. One was a credit card company seeking judgment for $38,000. The other was a dispute with a contractor they'd hired to renovate their kitchen and then couldn't afford to pay. My parents, who were so concerned about Alex's ability to provide financial security, were barely hanging on financially themselves. Their entire lifestyle was built on debt and desperate attempts to maintain appearances they couldn't actually afford. But that wasn't the most shocking thing I discovered. The most shocking thing was a series of social media posts and community newsletter mentions that painted a very different picture of their recent behavior. My mother, who presented herself as a pillar of the community, had apparently had a falling out with 3 different charitable organizations in the past year. The reasons varied, but the pattern was clear. She would volunteer for high-visibility roles, then create drama when she didn't get the recognition she felt she deserved. My father, who loved to talk about his business connections and professional success, had recently been dropped from the board of the local Chamber of Commerce after what one newsletter euphemistically described as differences in vision and approach. They weren't the respected, successful community leaders they'd always presented themselves as. They were social climbers who had overextended themselves financially and socially, desperately trying to maintain a status they'd never actually achieved. Now their daughter was about to marry someone they perceived as beneath their station, and they were terrified of what that would do to their already fragile reputation. But here's what they didn't know. Alex had agreed to let me handle the situation however I thought was best. "If you want to tell them who my family is, I'm okay with that," he said. "I've been dreading this conversation for months, but maybe it's time." "Oh, I'm going to tell them," I said. "But not until after they've shown everyone exactly who they really are." I spent the next week documenting everything my parents had done to sabotage our wedding. Every phone call to vendors, every conversation with family members, every lie they told about Alex's character. I saved screenshots, recorded conversations where legally possible, and asked friends and family members to send me summaries of what my parents had said to them. The evidence was damning. They hadn't just expressed disapproval. They conducted a systematic campaign to isolate me from my support system and undermine my relationship based on lies and assumptions. But I also started building a different kind of evidence, proof of who Alex really was. I asked his permission to contact some of his family members, and what I learned made me fall in love with him all over again. His younger sister told me about the scholarship fund he'd quietly established for kids from low-income families who wanted to learn trades. His cousin told me about the time Alex had used his own money to save the local community center from closing, but had insisted on remaining anonymous. Alex's father, when I finally spoke to him, was incredibly warm and welcoming. "Emma," he said, "Alex has told us so much about you. We've been hoping to meet you for months, but Alex asked us to let him handle the relationship at his own pace. We respect his independence, even when we don't understand all his choices." "What do you mean?" "Well, we know Alex has been working construction and living modestly, and we support his desire to build his own life. But we also worry about him sometimes, especially when he tells us about challenges that we could easily help with. Like this wedding situation with your parents."
"He told you about that?" "He did."
"And Emma, I want you to know that if Alex is happy, we're happy. We don't care about your parents' concerns about money or status or any of that nonsense. We care about whether you make our son smile the way you do." I realized that Alex's family had been waiting patiently in the background, ready to welcome me whenever Alex felt comfortable making that introduction. They weren't pushy or demanding. They trusted Alex's judgment completely. What a contrast to my own parents, who thought their approval was so important that they were willing to destroy my happiness to maintain their sense of control. That's when I finalized my plan. I was going to let my parents continue their sabotage campaign right up until the wedding. I was going to let them boycott the ceremony and tell everyone who would listen that I was making a terrible mistake. I was going to let them show the entire family exactly who they were when they thought they were right and I was wrong. And then, at exactly the right moment, I was going to reveal the truth about Alex's background and watch their entire worldview crumble. The wedding was in 1 week. I'd invited Alex's family, but asked them to be discreet about their wealth and connections. I wanted to give my parents every opportunity to dig themselves deeper into the hole they'd created. Casey, my best friend and maid of honor, was the only person who knew about my plan. "Emma, are you sure about this?" she asked. "It's pretty cold-blooded." "Casey, they hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on the man I love, then lied to our entire family about what they found. They tried to sabotage my wedding vendors and turn my friends against me. They offered Alex money to leave me. What part of that deserves a gentle response? When you put it that way? Besides, I'm not doing anything to them. I'm just going to let them do it to themselves. All I'm doing is revealing the truth at the right moment." The wedding was going to be beautiful. 50 people who genuinely cared about Alex and me, celebrating our love in a gorgeous garden setting. Alex's family would be there, elegant, sophisticated, genuinely kind people who had raised an amazing man. And my parents would be sitting at home, smug in their certainty that they'd saved me from a terrible mistake. They had no idea what was coming. Our wedding day arrived, and it was perfect. Intimate, authentic, and filled with people who actually loved us. But 3 days later, my parents showed up at our door, and what they said next changed everything. May 15th was the most beautiful day of my life. 50 people gathered in a botanical garden to watch Alex and me promise to love each other forever. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, personal, meaningful, and filled with genuine joy. Alex's family was there, and they were exactly what I'd expected, gracious, kind, and clearly wealthy, but without any of the pretentious attitudes my parents associated with money. His mother wore a simple but elegant dress that probably cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment. His father talked knowledgeably about wine and art, but spent most of his time asking our friends about their lives and careers. His sister gave a toast that brought everyone to tears. Alex has always been the kind of person who sees the best in people and brings out the best in people. Emma, thank you for loving my brother exactly as he is, and Alex, thank you for finding someone who makes you laugh the way Emma does. There were 2 empty seats in the front row where my parents should have been sitting. A few people asked about them, and I simply said they couldn't make it today. I wasn't going to let their absence cast a shadow over our celebration. Michael came, despite our parents' disapproval. He apologized tearfully during the reception for not standing up to them sooner. Emma, I was a coward. I should have supported you from the beginning. Alex is clearly a good guy, and you're happier than I've ever seen you. I'm sorry I let Mom and Dad make me doubt that. Michael, you're here now. That's what matters. The wedding photos were stunning. Alex and I looked radiant, surrounded by people who celebrated our love instead of questioning it. When we posted a few photos on social media that night, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Friends and extended family members who hadn't been able to attend commented about how happy we looked, how beautiful the wedding was, how perfect we were together. For 3 days, we basked in newlywed bliss. We opened wedding presents, sent thank you notes, and marveled at how perfectly everything had gone despite my parents' attempts at sabotage. Then, on Thursday evening, our doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my parents standing on our porch, and I barely recognized them. My mother, who never appeared in public without perfect hair and makeup, looked like she'd been crying. My father, who usually carried himself with pompous confidence, looked smaller and older than I'd ever seen him. Emma, sweetheart, my mother said, her voice shaking. We need to talk to you. Please. Can we come in? I looked back at Alex, who was reading on the couch. He nodded slightly, and I stepped aside to let them in. They perched uncomfortably on our living room chairs, the same furniture they'd once criticized as not very substantial, and my father cleared his throat nervously. Emma, we owe you an apology. A huge apology. We made a terrible mistake. What kind of mistake? I asked, even though I knew exactly what was coming. My mother pulled out her phone and showed me a social media post, one of our wedding photos that had been shared by Alex's sister. We saw this photo, and we recognized some of the people in the background. And then we did some more research, and we discovered. She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Discovered what, Mom? My father took over. We discovered that Alex comes from the Morrison family, the Morrison hotel chain. Emma, why didn't you tell us that Alex's family is worth hundreds of millions of dollars? I looked at Alex, who was watching this conversation with calm interest. We'd prepared for this moment, but seeing it actually happen was surreal. Because it didn't seem relevant, I said simply. Didn't seem relevant? My mother's voice cracked. Emma, we've been worried sick about your financial security, about whether Alex could provide for you, about whether you were making a mistake that would affect your entire future. And all this time, he comes from one of the wealthiest families in the state. Yes, I said. All this time. My parents looked at each other, then back at me, then at Alex, who hadn't said a word. Alex, my father said, we owe you an enormous apology. We misjudged you completely. We had no idea about your background, your family's success, your prospects. Alex finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, my family's money doesn't change who I am. I'm the same person I was last week, when you thought I wasn't good enough for your daughter. But why didn't you tell us? My mother asked. Why let us think you were just a what, Mom? I interrupted. Just a what? She couldn't finish the sentence, because finishing it would have required her to admit how shallow and prejudiced she'd been. We made assumptions, my father said carefully. We were concerned about Emma's future, and we made assumptions based on incomplete information. No, I said, standing up. You made assumptions based on classism and snobbery. You decided that Alex wasn't good enough for me because he drives an old truck and works with his hands. You never bothered to get to know him as a person. Emma, please, my mother said. We know we made mistakes, but we were just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From being happy? From being with someone who treats me well? From building a life with someone who actually loves me for who I am? That's when the real reason for their visit became clear. Emma, sweetheart, my father said, We know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But we were hoping, that is, we were wondering if you and Alex might be willing to help us rebuild our relationship with you both. What kind of help are you talking about, Dad? He exchanged a look with my mother, and I saw something desperate pass between them. Well, my business has been struggling lately, and I was wondering if Alex might know of any investment opportunities, or if his family might be looking for partnerships in the hospitality industry. There it was. The real reason for their sudden change of heart, their tearful apology, their desperate visit to our doorstep. They didn't want to rebuild our relationship because they realized they'd been wrong about Alex's character. They wanted access to his family's money and connections. And, my mother added quickly, we were hoping that Alex's mother might be willing to sponsor me for membership in the Riverside Country Club. We've been trying to get in for years, but we need someone from an established family to recommend us. I felt sick. They were sitting in our living room, 3 days after boycotting our wedding, asking my husband to use his family connections to solve their financial problems and boost their social status. Alex looked at me, and I could see he was leaving this entirely up to me. He would follow my lead, whatever I decided to do. I walked over to the folder I'd prepared weeks ago, the one containing all the evidence of their sabotage campaign, their lies, their manipulation. Before we talk about helping you with anything, I said, placing the folder on the coffee table, I think you need to understand exactly what you put us through. I opened the folder and started pulling out documents. Screenshots of their social media posts about my poor judgment. Emails they'd sent to extended family members questioning Alex's character. Records of their phone calls to our wedding vendors trying to cancel our arrangements. This, I said, spreading the evidence across the table, is what you did when you thought Alex wasn't good enough for me. You tried to sabotage our wedding, you lied to our family about his character, you offered him money to leave me, and you hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on him. My parents stared at the documents, their faces growing paler with each page. You had the private investigator's report, I continued. You knew weeks ago that Alex came from a wealthy family. You knew that all your concerns about his ability to provide for me were baseless. And you chose to keep that information secret and continue your campaign against him anyway. Emma, we can explain, my father started. Explain what? Explain why you were more committed to being right than to being honest? Explain why you were willing to destroy my happiness rather than admit you'd made a mistake. My mother was crying now, but they weren't tears of genuine remorse. They were tears of desperation, the tears of people who realized they'd gambled and lost. We were scared, she whispered. We were scared that we were losing you, that you were choosing him over us. I never chose him over you, I said. You forced me to choose by making your love conditional on my obedience. You decided that your approval was more important than my happiness. Alex finally spoke again. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that I don't hold grudges. I understand that you were concerned about Emma's well-being, even if I disagree with how you expressed that concern. My parents looked hopeful for the first time since they'd arrived. However, Alex continued, I also want you to understand that Emma and I build our relationships on mutual respect and genuine care, not on what people can do for each other professionally or financially. The hope in their eyes dimmed as they began to realize where this was heading. I sat back down across from them. Here's what's going to happen. If you want to rebuild a relationship with us, you're going to start by making some public apologies. What do you mean? My father asked. I mean you're going to call every person you lied to about Alex and correct those lies. You're going to apologize to our extended family for the drama you created. You're going to make it right with the vendors you harassed. And, Alex added gently, you're going to do it because it's the right thing to do, not because you want something from us. My mother looked stricken. But Emma, if we tell everyone we were wrong about Alex's background, they'll know we made assumptions. They'll know you judged someone based on appearances instead of character. I finished. Yes, they will. And regarding your business troubles and social aspirations, I said, looking at my father, those are problems you created for yourselves, and they're problems you need to solve yourselves. Alex and I are not going to be your financial salvation or your social ladder. The silence that followed was profound. My parents sat there, realizing that their desperate gambit had failed completely. Does this mean you're not going to forgive us?" my mother asked. "It means that forgiveness isn't the same thing as access," I replied. "If you want to rebuild our relationship, you can start by showing us that you've learned something from this experience, that you understand what you did wrong and why it was wrong." "How do we do that?" my father asked. Alex leaned forward. "By accepting that Emma is an adult who makes her own decisions. By treating her with respect instead of trying to control her. And by getting to know me as a person instead of as a financial opportunity." I added, "And by understanding that respect isn't something you get because of your bank account or your social connections. It's something you earn through your actions and your character." My parents left our house that night with a lot to think about. They'd come looking for financial help and social connections, and instead they'd gotten a reality check about their values and priorities. Watching my parents grovel for forgiveness after months of cruelty taught me the most valuable lesson about family, love, and the difference between worth and wealth. The aftermath of that confrontation was fascinating to watch unfold. My parents, faced with the choice between their pride and their relationship with me, chose to do the hard work of genuine change. It took them 2 weeks, but they made the phone calls. They called every family member they'd spoken to about Alex and apologized for their assumptions and lies. They called our wedding vendors and apologized for the confusion and harassment. They even posted a public apology on social media, acknowledging that they'd misjudged Alex's character and expressing regret for missing our wedding. The responses they got were educational for them. My Aunt Patricia told them bluntly, "I'm glad you finally came to your senses, but Emma and Alex handled this situation with more grace and maturity than either of you showed throughout this entire ordeal." Our wedding photographer said, "I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've never had parents try to sabotage their own daughter's wedding. I'm glad you're making things right, but that behavior was completely unacceptable." Even some of their social circle began to distance themselves, realizing that my parents' treatment of Alex revealed some ugly truths about their character and values. But slowly, gradually, we began to rebuild our relationship. Not the old relationship, where I was the obedient daughter who sought their approval for every major decision, but a new relationship built on mutual respect and clear boundaries. My father started joining Alex for coffee occasionally, and I watched him discover what I'd known all along, that Alex was intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely interesting to talk to. They found common ground in their love of history and their shared concern for me, though from very different perspectives. My mother took longer to come around, but eventually she began to appreciate Alex's quiet kindness and the way he supported my goals and ambitions without trying to control them. The most significant change was in how they treated me. They stopped trying to manage my decisions and started trusting my judgment. They began to see me as an adult whose choices deserved respect, even when they didn't understand them. 6 months later, when we invited them to a small dinner party at our house, they met Alex's parents for the first time. I watched my mother nervously adjust her jewelry and smooth her dress, clearly intimidated by meeting people she knew were wealthier and more socially prominent than she was. But Alex's parents were warm and welcoming, asking genuine questions about my parents' lives and interests. By the end of the evening, my mother was laughing at Alex's father's stories about hotel disasters, and my father was engaged in an animated discussion with Alex's mother about local politics. "They're lovely people," my mother said to me as we cleaned up afterward. "So down to earth, despite their background." "Wealth doesn't make people good or bad, Mom," I said gently. "Character does." She nodded, and I could see that she was finally beginning to understand what I'd been trying to tell her all along. The most beautiful part of this whole experience was watching Alex handle everything with such grace and wisdom. He never gloated about his family's wealth or used it as a weapon against my parents. He never made them feel small or foolish, even when they probably deserved it. He simply continued to be the kind, thoughtful person I'd fallen in love with, and eventually, even my parents couldn't resist his genuine goodness. Today, 2 years later, our relationship with my parents isn't perfect, but it's honest. They've learned to appreciate Alex for who he is, not what his bank account looks like. They've stopped trying to control my life and started celebrating my choices, even when those choices are different from what they would have chosen for me. Alex started his renovation business using his own savings and a small loan, refusing offers of financial help from both our families. The business is thriving because he's excellent at what he does, not because of his connections. He still drives the same old truck, still shops at thrift stores, and still volunteers at the literacy program. But now, when my parents talk about him to their friends, they brag about his work ethic, his kindness, his intelligence, and the way he makes their daughter happy. They've learned to measure success by different standards. The most important lesson I learned from this whole experience is that love, real love, isn't about what someone can provide for you materially. It's about how they treat you, how they support your dreams, how they make you feel about yourself. My parents spent months worried that Alex couldn't give me the life I deserved, not realizing that he was giving me something far more valuable, a relationship built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. The secondary lesson I learned is that sometimes people need to face the consequences of their actions before they're motivated to change. My parents didn't apologize because they suddenly realized they were wrong. They apologized because their behavior had costs they weren't willing to pay. But genuine change is possible, even for people who seem set in their ways. My parents today are more open-minded, less judgmental, and more focused on relationships than status. It took a crisis to get them there, but they made the journey. If you're dealing with family members who judge your relationships based on superficial criteria, here's my advice. Trust your own judgment about the people you love. Don't let other people's insecurities or prejudices make you doubt what you know in your heart to be true. And if someone shows you who they really are when they think you're making a mistake, believe them. But also remember that people can grow and change if they're willing to do the work. The sweetest victory isn't proving that you were right all along. It's building a life so full of love and happiness that other people's opinions become irrelevant. Speaking of family drama, wait until you hear what happened when Alex's wealthy ex-girlfriend found out about our marriage and decided she wanted him back. That woman's schemes made my parents' behavior look like amateur hour, but that's a story for another video. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a family disapprove of someone you loved? How did you handle it? And do you think my parents deserved forgiveness as quickly as they got it, or should I have made them work harder to rebuild our relationship? Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this story, and hit that notification bell because trust me, the drama in my life is far from over. Thanks for listening, and remember, the people who truly love you will want you to be happy, even if your happiness looks different than what they imagined for you.